Patience is a virtue.
It says, I push record to the cloud. Let's see if it's doing it. Come on. It says it's recording.
We'll have to believe it then.
Yeah, okay.
Why wouldn't we believe it?
It's going.
Okay. I want to share with you this morning out of the Gospel of Matthew, 13th chapter. If you have your scripture, you can turn there with me. We're going to be reading about the sower and the seed. And we'll read from Matthew chapter 13, verse 1 to verse 9. And then we'll skip over to verse 18 and read from there through to verse 23. Chapter 13, verse 1 through 9, and then from 18 to 23. The same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there. While the whole crowd stood on the beach, he told them many things in parables, saying, listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. Verse 18. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person who has no root, but endures only for a while, and when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of the wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, in another 30. This is the word of God, written for the people of God. I've said many times that I'm never, ever going to pass up the opportunity to emphasize how blessed we are to be West Virginians. God had a special place in his heart for you and I, but listen, with those privileges come responsibilities. You see, Jesus was a keen observer of people's circumstances and their situations. He saw them in the place that they were, and he knew what they understood. I can speak today with this parable in mind because I know you know. I know that you know what seed is, and I know that you know what soil is, and I know that you know how to plant. There's a lot of descriptions in this parable that if you lived in the inner city of Philadelphia, you would not understand. There are people that are living in the inner city of Chicago that have no idea that an egg comes from a chicken. Now that seems almost ridiculous to you and I, doesn't it? But we've lived that life, and our experience tells us and shows us and explains to us. When he talks about the mountains, when he talks about the hills, when he talks about the grass and the trees and the rivers and the streams, you know what he means. You wouldn't know that if he was born in the middle of the desert. So we're privileged. And we so much better understand what God's trying to speak to us through Jesus in this parable. And so consequently, because we know, we're responsible. A Sunday school teacher was teaching the younger children in her class about God's creating Adam from the dust. And so she finally came to the conclusion, I want you to know that you're actually dirt. Well, the pastor's little son was in that class, and he wasn't a bit shy, and he raised his hand. He said, now, teacher, you're telling me that I'm made out of dirt? And she said, well, actually, yes. Yes, you are. Well, she could tell he got kind of nervous about that and aggravated, and he was wringing his hands, and he was sitting in his chair. Finally, he looked up at her with his big white eyes. And he said, I want you to know, my mom's not going to be happy about this. I probably got in more trouble in the household from being dirty and dragging dirt in the house than possibly anything else. And don't you know, even in this day, in this month, that I'll be 66 years old, I still get in trouble bringing dirt in the house. So today we're going to talk about a dirt story. I didn't say dirty. I want to talk about dirt. I don't figure that most of us that came here this morning considered the fact that we're made out of dirt. Jesus is relaying, revealing, relating something about the kingdom of God through a medium that these people understand. If they weren't shepherds, they were farmers or both. And so they knew exactly what he meant by sowing seed. It's certainly true in today's parable, is it not? It's a simple parable, yet it appears in all three synoptic gospels. This particular parable is told by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That would suggest to me that it's probably important. So imagine a farmer in those days planting seed, and he wouldn't have had all the specialized technology that we've got today. You know that John Deere makes a tractor that's climatized, okay, air conditioned, and GPS coordinates in that tractor. Matter of fact, the Farmer Journal is predicting that this year they'll come on the market with a with a tractor that drives itself. So you'll be able to sit there on your computer and punch in the coordinates of where you want it to plow or seed or reap, and it'll follow those coordinates, beginning and end, precisely where you want it to go without anybody driving. But imagine how inefficient this farmer that Jesus tells us about must have been in the manner of sowing the seed. The seed was going everywhere. Can you see him? You're not paying particular attention about where the seed's going. Now, if it was in my garden, I said, well, wait a minute. You got to plant those beans that are around him. You got to plant those corn in him. Some of the seed was landing on a hardened path where it could not possibly grow. And some seed fell on rocky soil. Some seed was strewn in weeds and thorns where the seedlings were choked out. But a few seed landed on, Jesus described, good soil. This farmer was so slipshod in his sowing that we can certainly conclude that this parable is not about farming. Not the story that he's trying to tell. It's really about God. It's about God and the seed. That seed that is sown in his grace. It's evident that God is generous with his grace. If we understand the parable, he scatters it liberally. And the soil on which the seed falls, you know what the soil represents? Us. Matter of fact, it represents everyone in the world. So in a sense, we're all basically dirt. But not all dirt is the same. My father-in-law used to come to my garden and he'd say, "Son, you got good dirt. You got good dirt." His garden was beside a machine shop that all kinds of contaminated waste was dumped in, oil and filings, and it took him a long time to build that soil up enough to grow anything. Not all dirt's the same. God's grace is available to everyone, but not everyone responds the same way. And because God gives us the freedom to decide our destiny for ourselves and will not force himself into our lives, God's grace works differently in different people's lives. And I believe the various conditions that are described here reflect our humanness. It's interesting that this is one of the very few parables that's repeated in all three Gospels, but it's also one of the few times that Jesus takes a moment to explain. This is a special parable. Jesus goes into verse 18 explaining what the parable means. Another indication that it's an important teaching. And so he describes four kinds of soil. Jesus isn't teaching us about growing crops. He's describing four types of people. So the first we hear is the seed that's thrown along the path. The unbeliever, the agnostic, possibly even the atheist. Jesus says, listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, and or using the term accept it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in the heart. This is the seed sown along the path. Imagine just for a moment a path through the field or a forest. Now, see, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about path. If you've been raised in the inner city and all you've walked on was cement, you wouldn't know what I'm trying to describe here. How does a path get created? Well, it gets traveled on regularly, back and forth. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of people walked on that path. And what happens to the soil? It gets compacted. In the dry season, it's hard as a rock. And even when it rains, it doesn't absorb any water, right? It's so hard that it can. And what seed would possibly be laying on the path that couldn't get in the ground it gets washed away or the birds go. Any seed that falls on that path has little chance of taking root. The seed that falls along the path are those who don't accept it. They don't take it to heart. They hear the gospel, but do not make it their own. There's an article on the so-called psychic service industry. You've seen it, advertisements on TV, haven't y'all? Where these psychics, you call them up, you give them the 1-800 number, they charge you so much by the minute, and they'll reveal what you've seen them, haven't you? It's a booming business nowadays. There are so-called psychics everywhere, according to this report, and psychic readings and palm readings and tarot cards and tea leaves generate a revenue stream of somewhere around $2 billion a year. Fortune magazine says, do you know who these court consumers are? Those that are using these sites, you know who they are? Top tier executives. Particularly in the tech industry. Which proves the validity of the observation that when people choose not to believe in God, they still have a hunger to believe in something. And so as the country's song goes, if you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. They did. So brothers and sisters, in this new media, in this new way of reaching people, in this Zoom era, we found a new front door. Because knocking on these people's doors don't work anymore. This is how we're going to get in their home. This is how we're going to get through the crack of the door as they open it up to say, who are you? I bet you of 100 people that you know, 90% of them are on Facebook. I believe if we're going to grow the church, I believe if the church is going to exist into the future, we need to be opening those doors. And then inviting them into the fellowship. That seed that falls along the path to hardcore non-believers, and again, they are a growing group. Let's call the next group that Jesus describes in the parable the morning glories. The morning glories. The seed that falls on rocky ground. The seed falling on rocky ground, Jesus says, refers to someone who hears the word and who receives it with joy. But since they have no roots, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Anybody know anyone in their lives like that? You know. Rocky soil is not quite as treacherous for planting seeds as the hardened path. Plants might grow initially in rocky soil, but the prospect of it producing is slim because the loose soil is so shallow. The morning glories look good in the early part of the day, but by evening they're wilted and withered by the sun. This example could be applied to many Christian believers who make an initial commitment of Christ, but they fall away. A few will be sincere, but when they get out in the world, they waver, and they will. Only a handful experience the joy, the new meaning, and purpose that only Christ can give. Now he talks about a third group, and let's call this group, for lack of a better term, distracted. The group consists of the seed that falls among the thorns And he's referring to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. It's inevitable that no matter how careful the sower might be, some of the seed will fall into an area that's infested with weeds and thorns. These pests grow much more aggressively than the good seed does, and so they're overcome. Have you ever noticed that? How well those weeds grow in your garden? How fast they grow? The grass in my yard doesn't care whether it rains or not. Doesn't care whether you even tend it or you fertilize it or if you do anything to it, it's going to grow. If I could translate that kind of growing into my garden, I could feed the world out of that 40 by 80 pot. They're distracted. And those distractions prevent us from focusing on Christ and His will for our lives. We talk nowadays about distracted driving, but what about distracted living? When we focus on nearly everything except Christ and His will for our lives, have we been distracted, brothers and sisters? Do we have another distraction to deal with? Absolutely. But fortunately, there's one more group that Jesus describes, and this is the seed that falls on good soil. And let's call this soil, the company of the committed. Jesus says the good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it, accepts it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 100 or 60 or 30 times what was sown. The company of the committed refers to those who Christ can always count on. Christ can always count on. Wow. And notice what Jesus says about these folks. They produce a crop, a yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. I believe Jesus is saying to us that when we give Him our best, when we give Him our best service, our work is magnified more than we could ever dream. Our influence on our family and on our community and even the world is greater than we could possibly imagine. You never know, brothers and sisters, how far a cup of cold water is going to go. How many people you've touched by handing out a simple little cross. How many lives you've changed just because you sat down and played a song. Or helped them through a tough time of their finances. Or got them a service that they depended on in their home. You never know. To people down at Best Buy, we were getting us from the church, and we were telling them what we were going to do, and we were telling them how we were going to reach people we hadn't been able to reach before. And I hope that as we go forward, you'll continue to share this link and to share this information with anybody you know. We've got an account that's unlimited people and unlimited time. You never know. You sow a small seed into someone's heart, and you reap a harvest that's 100. Or you allow the Lord of the harvest to sow a small seed in your heart, and that seed's multiplied through the people you touch. Who knows where it will end? So if you've forgotten, I'll remind you that I'm the pastor who has all the questions, not all the answers. So I leave you with a question. Where are you in today's parable? What soil describes where you are? What soil best describes your commitment to Christ and the church? So let me suggest this day for us that we'll want to pray. That we'll want to pray that Christ will help us to be the good soil, where the harvest is increased 30 and 50 or even 100. That our life might have purpose. And with that purpose, we might have peace. And that the world will be enriched because we've encountered Jesus Christ. He has become our master. And he is doing a good work through us. Let me say this. Let me recognize the fact that what we're doing here this morning is brand new, and I couldn't have done it without my wife. Who's been so gracious to give of her time and her efforts and her knowledge. Could have done it. I don't know, I've told you this before, I don't know that Gary would even been in the ministry or not. And so she's been good enough to help us venture into this new ministry. I want to also recognize Hopewell for how they stepped out in faith by bringing Wi-Fi into the church. It's not just going to bless this congregation, but it's going to bless everybody on the chart, bless anybody and everybody who's going to tune in. They stepped out in faith, not completely understanding or completely knowing about where this ministry might lead. So I want to lift them up this morning and all the churches on this chart who have joined in, participated, gathered under one virtual umbrella. What a blessing it's been for us to be together that way, a way that we've not been able to in the past. And to know and understand and recognize the talent that is on the 5 campuses we have here in this Catawba chart. Thank you. Thank you for all of those who have contributed and participated in this ministry. So I pray as we leave. May the good Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you. May he pour his countenance over you. May he be gracious unto you. And maybe, Father God, through our service, the church might multiply 100, 60, 30-fold what is sowed. We might know the peace that passes our understanding through that ministry. In Jesus, God's people say. Amen. And amen. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your attendance and continue to share that as we post this ministry to YouTube, as we post this ministry to Facebook, that others might hear the word and that their lives might be changed. God bless you all.